Hey, everybody. Hi, thanks for being with me today and for giving me just a little bit time yesterday. Yeah, I was a little bit under the weather yesterday. I can't even say exactly why. I'm sure I would have felt better if we were all here together in my nice little space here. Then it would have felt like I would have used all the healing energy that we had to be here together. But, well, anyway, today's a good day. So, our topic today, living, dying, and living again, was suggested by one of our Facebook friends. And I love it when you suggest topics, by the way, because sometimes they are things that I haven't thought about and would love to explore, or sometimes they are subjects that I did explore in the past and that some of you remember from seminars that I did, podcasts, radio shows. Gosh, it's a nice little history going back and lots of different things that we've explored. And this subject, reincarnation, rebirth, our afterlife, soul's essence, things like that, are things that never really go out of style, I think, in terms to consider. And you know, there are fashions. There's fashions in spirituality as well. There's the seasons fashions. There's subjects that we seem to consider more briefly or on a more expanded level, either depending on what's happening in the world, you know. So, for instance, now we know there's so much happening with climate change and things. We really can't help but think about the world and the earth and our resources and what's happening with that. And of course, we've been considering that for a while now. And it's very real now, what Gaia thinks or feels or about our future and things is very real. So I know a few of you mentioned that you can only stay for a little while. I get it. There's so much to do in the world and in our busy lives these days. I do always save these recordings. They're live for those of us that can be here to share and to interact with one another. But they are saved here on Facebook, which not everyone is a part of. They are also will be on my website, pepperkeenlewis.com. They'll probably be on the next newsletter. If you didn't get a chance to check the website, they'll be on my YouTube channel if you're a YouTube person. So we're trying to just keep it current and make everything as available. So if you can't be here when it's live, don't worry about it. But I do love hearing from you before with some of the questions, which I got some this time. And after the fact, too, let me know what you thought about that subject or how you wanted to explore it in a different way or more deeply as well. So again, I was saying that some of these topics that we explore, they're like fashions in some ways. They go in and out of season, depending on what's happening in our life and what's happening in the rest of the world. That makes us consider things from a spiritual standpoint, sometimes a moral or an ethical standpoint. In some ways, that's a good topic in itself. You know, what's the difference between spirituality, morality, ethics? You know, what is it that makes some of us consider it one thing but not another? You don't need to believe in God or a deity to actually be spiritual. And I know many people that are or aren't in that way or in that fashion. So anyway, but the topic for today, reincarnation is the name, the title that we give to it, especially here in the West. It's what we became accustomed to more than any other word. If we're exploring that subject from a spiritual standpoint, we tend to say reincarnation. But it's a Western term that came to us from a Hindu Tibetan background, the idea of reincarnation, that there is a soul, that there is a soul that lives on in its entirety beyond this life. This soul, which is beyond our personality, which is timeless, which has always been alive in some way and expresses itself completely in one way or another, life after life after life, that there is one soul, which is us, that has been around or assigned to us, if you want to call it that way, or is what we are when we are not in body. This idea of soul reincarnating is a very, very old concept, back from the very, very beginnings of the Hindu religion, which is one of our oldest established, traditional, acknowledged religions. Another word which is similar but not exactly the same, and we don't use it quite as much here in the West, in Buddhism it's used quite a bit, is rebirth. So we use them sometimes interchangeably, reincarnation, rebirth, but there is a difference. So in the Buddhist religion, again, a very old, established, traditional, non-theistic religion, uses the word rebirth. And the difference between the two is that in Buddhism, there is not the same understanding or belief that there is a soul, that there is one individual soul that will then reincarnate in its entirety into a next life. So for instance, we could say that in reincarnation, the soul passes through the levels, the planes of existence, into the lighter planes, and either immediately or after some considerable time, that same soul reincarnates. With the idea of rebirth, there's more of the idea that sometimes is called transmigration. And again, the difference is that in Buddhism, there is not a belief in a complete soul, because in Buddhism, they believe in impermanence. So impermanence means that everything changes. Nothing, although everything is eternal or infinite, everything is always in a condition of flux or change or evolution, which would mean that there cannot be one permanent soul. And so from that idea, the rebirth would mean that at our death or transition, the particles, the essential nature that we are, all of that part then dissolves. The solidness of it, the way that everything holds together, that tells us that this is what we are or who we are, it dissolves into the whole or the all or the emptiness, the void, the completeness. There's so many words on that scale that describe the same thing. So the individuality at that point returns to the wholeness and is then merged into the all. So that's a very frightening concept for some people, because we have a lot invested in being individuals and in learning life lessons and in trusting that the things that we have learned in this earth school and the relationships that we have made, promises and vows that we have made, and these different levels that we may have achieved in our spirituality that feel a little bit like climbing a ladder, when we think about that idea of just dissolving into an emptiness, it feels like everything could be lost. And so it feels frightening in some ways. But we also have to ask ourselves, who or what is that thought frightening to? So for the most part, the answer to that, that comes in answer from Buddhism and some of the other traditions, is that the part of us that fears becoming lost in some way is still attached to an ego, to an I, me, the idea that I have achieved something and don't want to lose something. This me part, that could be temporary or could become lost, or that I might have to start over completely. In some way translates to maybe it didn't matter. Maybe life doesn't matter so much if it's so transitory, so ephemeral, so temporary. So some of these thoughts come to play, and when we consider those thoughts in our own consciousness, then that's when maybe we begin to determine, well, I believe more in reincarnation, or I believe more in the idea of rebirth. That makes more sense to me. People usually ask me what I think about that, or what I feel, or what I believe. And I would honestly have to say that I think that they are both true, and I think that they are both not true enough. I think that our experience and our limited understanding here in the third dimension, in our 3D life, and from all the knowledge that we have had, is very, very conditioned by what we believe, what we want to believe, what we've been taught, what we've been studied, how we've been brought up, and everything else. So I believe that they are both true. I believe that there is an essential nature to us that knows and knows that it knows. So that is always, always. So from that standpoint, we don't lose anything. We don't forget anything. And at the same time, not everything that we remember or every small thing that we have done or accomplished matters so much that it needs to be accumulated one on top of another on top of another, and that we need to carry that bundle with us, or burden, some people would say, into the next life and the next life. If we ask ourselves, does that soul need to be either burdened or bundled with everything that we have learned? If we think in terms of 10 or 15 or 600 lifetimes, maybe we would say, yes, it would be worth remembering all these experiences, the people, what the planet looked like, all of the different phases that we have known. It would be worth knowing all of that. But from a different standpoint, from one of the standpoints that says that we have had countless lifetimes, that we cannot count that high, because there has been cycle upon cycle upon cycle of lives in different ways, where the world, the earth, has expressed itself differently, where we didn't look the same, feel the same, relate to others the same, so that all of these memories would not necessarily serve us in the way that, from our way that we study and save information and think of ourselves taking these incredible journeys that circle and cycle around. So it depends on how we view that. And for that reason, it makes sense to me that we can access records of our being, of our knowing, of our understanding, without carrying it all around. It gets easier and easier to think that way. You know, if we look at our technology here and how things are stored in the cloud, they don't need to be stored on our physical computer or devices anymore, where it might get lost or misplaced or erased in some ways. The idea that it could be out there someplace and accessible and available to us, but where we don't have to carry all of that with us. It seems a very healing way to relate to life, I think, anyway. So there's my opinion on it, and I continue to study this subject. It is appealing, and I study it. We could say that we study it on a daily basis, because I think the most important thing that I could say about living again or our next life is that everything that we do and think and act upon, or not act upon, or assist others with, everything that we are doing in this life and in this moment is exactly what is creating our next moment and our next life, as a matter of fact, regardless of whether we think that that life is the same soul that's going to be in that next life, or that we are going to reassemble our particles and chromosomes and cells into 5,000 different lives at the same time, or that might carry that essence out into the universe in all the ways that matters. Regardless of which of those paths we believe in or we think that we are going to take, it is the idea that everything that we do in this life. So everything I'm talking to you about now is the culmination of the last few weeks where I said, oh, let's explore this subject. And then I started to think about it again, and you started to think about it again, and now we're coming together. So the past is coming together in this present moment, and then we'll take that into the future, wash it away, bring something else into this moment to consider. So we are in this very moment creating our next life. That becomes important when we think about how little of the time we are actually consciously aware of that on a daily basis. We think 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. That's a lot. That's a true statistic. And out of those, I actually printed that sheet of statistics I had, and then I didn't bring it right here to where I'm sitting now, so I'll let it go for now. But 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day for an average person. Most of them, like 85 to 95% of them, are not new thoughts. They're not original thoughts to us. Very few of them are useful thoughts, practical, important. If we take those thoughts and see how many of those lead to true and deep feelings about something, there's even less. Most of them are repetitive thoughts, so they are thoughts that we thought yesterday and or the day before. And we're not as conscious of the ones that may be important or present or something. So the idea here is that in creating our next life, which we're doing now, is to be present, what some people are calling mindful. I hesitate to use that word. It's become the overused buzzword of the last 5 years or so, maybe more. So if we are present, awake, aware, interested in our life, much more interested than the things that go floating by that have very little to do with us. If we are interested in the lives of those whom we love and want to assist and care about, if we are aware of having a certain amount of heartbeats and thoughts a day that are also open, inviting, to the degree that we can, non-judgmental, that's a subject that has been suggested for a future chat as well. Judgment, the difference between judgment, opinions, open-mindedness, so maybe we'll explore that soon if you like that idea. If not, feel free to keep suggesting others. So this idea then of presence, mindfulness, becoming aware of the thoughts, which ones are less important, to the degree that we can, ignoring them, letting them fade into the background, that stream of consciousness that's more interested in itself than anything else, and letting that fade into the background, and as much as possible becoming more aware of thoughts that we are interested in and that we feel will make a difference in this world that we live in and that we share. So those are the ways that we are beginning to now create our next life. And so our next life is one that that comes to us, that we draw to ourselves, that we embark upon now. So to that extent, we could say that we are already living that next life now. So I want to answer a few questions because they seem related to what we're talking about as well too. I want to say one thing as well about death. Death is what we call it really on this side. We experience the death of our loved ones, of someone we love about or care about or hear about. We experience that death. We experience them no longer here. We experience that their body is no longer active. We experience their senses, their goodbyes. All of that is what we call death. They're withdrawing from this life and this body. What they experience, we can't say exactly, but that's not the same thing as what we call death. That's what we experience. So we could say transmigration, for instance, is a better term, because that essential being or nature or composite, in Buddhism they say the aggregates then begin to separate and move into their own true nature or original nature. And so all of that process is not necessarily death. All of that could already be called rebirth or discovery, or a change in consciousness or planes of adventure. It's just that we don't get to see that. We have a limited visibility of what is happening with this individual. We only know what happens with their body and with the personality and consciousness that we have known in the way that we have known. So it's a little bit different way to look at, if we're going to look at death, if we're going to look at reincarnation one way, we need to look at death in a slightly different way as well, and see it as really that transition or that moment in which a being transitions to its next nature. It could very well be another world. So we have different understandings of what happens in that state. So maybe I'll respond to one of the questions I received shortly before we got started as well, which is how are souls acclimated to the afterlife after dying, for instance, from a long illness? So that's a really great question, because more than likely what we have experienced with this person, with this being, is this long suffering, is a long illness, and what it has done to them and to their body and to our way of relating with them. And from our personal standpoint, the last thing we want to imagine is that they will then transition to this next consciousness and in that suffering mode as well. So this is my understanding based on much that I have read, studied, spoken with other teachers, experienced, been related to. My life experience is the answer that I give you is based on all of that. Is that first, it depends how we die. If we die consciously enough, so that means that we are aware that we are now leaving this world behind, we are leaving our loved ones or this body, that the body has been suffering in this illness for a certain amount of time, and that we are now leaving that behind. If we are aware of that consciously as we transition, then it's a very easy, more like really just almost an instantaneous peeling back of the layers of a kind of skin that we don't need anymore. The burden, the heaviness, very much like taking off a really heavy overcoat when we realize that the temperature is fine out and that we don't need it anymore. That a conscious transition brings about that experience. And what I have been told as well is that if we can do that consciously, there is also an almost instantaneous knowing of what created that illness, or why we had it, or in some cases what would have cured it. In some cases something easy, simple, that we, in our limited understanding on this side, are not aware of yet, or how our thoughts about an illness maintained it, aggravated it. We might also understand how the heredity that we chose, the DNA structure that we chose in that incarnation, contributed to that illness or dis-ease, and how if we would have known how to heal some of those karmic influences, we could have taken that apart at an earlier time. So there's that kind of understanding as well. If we don't transition in that way, if we transition in a state of shock, in an unconscious state, in an angry, I can't believe this is happening to me and I'm really angry about it state. If we transition without some measure of peace, then what we have here, we take with us to wherever or whatever there is, because that is our thought, that's our essence, and that is in essence the last, or we're saying the most important thing that we are walking through that threshold with. So that's why if you read a lot of spiritual understandings, traditional religions, they all say in some way how we live is how we die. Or that it's important to die before you die. These are all different references to the same thing, that if we can die to some of the old thoughts, burdens, regrets, resentments, misunderstandings, all of these things that we carry with us, if we can let that go at the earliest possible time. We always think, well, we're not going to forgive that person. They don't deserve our forgiveness. They don't deserve whatever it is. But the answer is that we continue to carry that along. They may or not carry it. We're carrying it for ourselves and for them. And we're carrying it with us into that next life that we're creating. We're carrying an opportunity to do something, if not now, then later. So when we ask those questions, what will I be or what will I have in that next life? You know, we might, and I don't want to do the same thing. I don't want to do this life again. I don't want to repeat mistakes. There's, you know, I've said these things. I know you have, we all have. So it's determined a lot by what can we do in this life? What can we let go of once and for all, once and for good? For now, lighten our load and lighten other people's load as well. All of that makes a difference. So to the degree that we cross over, transition in a state that is really depleted, and that is not as healthy a transition, we could say. The third side of that is that many times when we are in illness or dis-ease, we have this healing ability to draw to ourselves other beings, perhaps other beings that experience something similar, perhaps other beings that were somehow involved in any kind of influences, karmic ones, if we want to call it that. Family members that may have been part of either the creation or the healing of any of these discomforts. We may draw their essence to us as we transition, which would also help us to lighten those burdens a lot so that we can then move beyond them. So the best answer to that is that the suffering does not continue unless some thought in our being, some really sticky, dense thought that we somehow deserved this, or that it's our cross to bear to carry this forward, or to carry it so that others don't. If we condense, if we make those thoughts dense enough that they are attached to us, then we need to take them with us until we can do something about it. So how we live is how we die or transition, and all of that. Hope I answered that question as best as I can. Another question I received shortly before our broadcast as well. It's a good one too. I'm gonna paraphrase it a little bit, but I think I have it right. Are we at a place in our evolution so that we can return to this plane, so that when we return to this plane, when we return in our next life, we will not lose the insights and transformations that we have gained in this life? So that's a really great question. So basically, our consciousness that we are working hard for, consciousness, spirituality, subjects that we've learned about, forgiveness that we've done, everything that we have accomplished in this life, do we get to keep that? Do we get to keep that and say, okay, we accomplished that in this life and we don't have to do that again? Or do we, have we evolved far enough that we can do that? Or do we lose it? Do we start over again? And, could we say this was for nothing or so? So the best answer I have for that is that, again, the level, the degree to which we are consciously awakened on as much of a basis as possible. So as much of the day or our time as possible that we are aware of what we are, of what's at stake, of personal growth, of what we believe, to the degree that we know that our purpose here is to evolve, to remain conscious, to gain understanding, to see things as they are, to see the third dimensional plane on Earth simply for what it is and how it is, not to make it into more or less than what it is, or a lifetime more or less than what it is. We carry that with us into wherever we go. Now, if you believe in reincarnation, meaning that the soul will then retain all of that and take that learning and build upon it at another time, then that's one understanding. If your understanding is more of rebirth, in which everything, all the particles, all of our aggregates dissolve into their original state of being, then that remains embedded in all of those particles as well. So from that understanding, from my understanding, nothing is lost. But the degree by which it does not go back into an unconscious, unknowing, unfeeling remains for us to continue that path of growth, of discovery, of uncovering, of embodying that wisdom that we are, so that we don't come back to it and say, well, it was like book learning, like a scholarship, a scholar's understanding, so that we embodied that wisdom. We became that wisdom. It became entrenched in every cell, every particle, every understanding, so that moving forward, we understand this is who or what we are. In that way, we carry it all forward. In that same way, the things that we no longer believe, the things that we have outgrown, old beliefs maybe that we got from traditional religions in our childhood, things that we no longer believe, those things begin to fall away. They dissolve, as well as everything else dissolves, returns to its original nature. And if it doesn't serve a purpose, a current purpose that assists us in being present and growing, it just dissolves, it falls away. And we don't need to carry that any longer. So the bigger question then in answer to this, do you believe, the person who asked this question, do you believe that your evolution in this life has been sufficient? Do you believe that you have earned or transcended some older thoughts, embodied new ones, carry them with you now, find them useful, share them with others? Everything in that way, you will for certain take that with you. And regardless of what our next place of evolution, our next understanding, our next lifetime brings us, that will still be embodied. And if it's very important to you and very related to how you feel about a next life, that will be with you as well. So I hope that helps. And all these questions are great, and they are somewhat related to each other and to what I had planned to share as well. So here's another question I received is, who decides where and when we will come back? Great question, and I think we all want to know that. We'd love to know what our next life is going to be. Some of us don't want a next life. Some of us would like this to be the end, or we'll come back when the world looks a little bit better or more inviting than it does right now. Yeah, it's tough and confusing out there. Not that we weren't warned. I think we were warned that it was going to kind of look this way. We just didn't know exactly how it was going to manifest in some ways. So who or what decides when we come back? And related to that is, do we have any choice in that? So already we somewhat said that what we're doing now and how we embody this lifetime determines what the next life will be as well. There's not a specific answer to this. There are lives and beings that are very intertwined, either because of long ago family experiences, spiritual family experiences, karmic things, intertwined destinies. There are some beings that are so intertwined that when they come back has to do with the rest of the group, whether it's one being or many or several beings. So that, let's say that I am going to reincarnate into my grandmother's next life. So then, or she was going to reincarnate into my next life because of some kind of karmic promises or such. That would mean that she would need to then wait until my lifetime is over, whenever it is, in order for us to then come together in a next life. So that's one example. Her waiting, however, if that's the case, waiting is not understood the way we consider waiting here. Time is not, we don't relate to time the same way we do in other dimensions. We're not living or waiting through a certain amount of months or years or anything. Time is a whole other concept, more attached to space and creativity. So it's not waiting for so many years or lifetimes to go by until we can then match that up. It's more like kind of like the way we would describe it as the law of attraction. They are essences and energies that are pulled together by life itself, drawn to one another by love and forces of nature that are beyond even our abilities to consider how exact and minute and perfect they are. The way we describe it would seem, just so blocky and calendar and year driven that we would miss the subtleties, the really delicate web of life, how intricate and perfect and how many levels there are to all that. So that's one instance of what would determine who or what comes next. Do we have a choice in where and how we come back? Some beings do. And that again has to do with our level of consciousness, how conscious we are in this life, how we are aligned with life itself, how attached we are to a being or to a choice or these different things. All of that determines how much of a choice we have. I will say that the average person on their average spiritual or moral development do not have much of a choice. And at the same time, that is a choice in itself, because that being has not developed or chosen a certain path or chosen to experience or express or develop that spiritual nature in a way that's a choice in itself. So in that case, these beings are simply drawn to the earth when people, places, natures, or experiences, or karmic moments, that perfection, that web of the universe kind of perfection, instantly knows that and begins to draw that individual being to the earth again, or to this earth plane. If you were in Star Trek terms, you could almost put it like a tractor beam or something. So that being is automatically drawn at that time to the earth, to a specific body or a location or a time or a kind of an experience that was determined. And there isn't really there's no personality there. There's no ego. There's no being fighting it, saying, no, no, not yet. It's not my time yet. I'm still resting. It doesn't work like that. When that energetic, there's like two forces that are drawn to one another. The perfection of the two forces recognize the timing, the sequence, and so it just happens. It just happens. It's drawn to the conception. So in that, there is like the three essences. So there is, say, the mother's DNA, the father's DNA, and the being and the karmic influences, the unanswered questions, the desires yet to be experienced, the nature of all these things, all of that draw these three beings together into conception. And at conception is when you would say those beings have been joined together. And you could say that that lifetime actually begins there. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm not saying that that is exactly when physical life happens. I'm not for or against, in terms of this topic, how we encourage or preserve life or don't. It's not what the subject is about. So I want to be real careful with my words here. These three essences, beings, forces are being drawn together, and that life stream is being created by those forces. Whether that even needs to come into a human body and a physical expression that lasts an 80-year lifetime or so is not even part of this equation. We're only talking here about forces being drawn together and how that begins a cycle. The cycle could be complete in one moment for all we know. And that's why it's another reason why it's very hard to determine how many lifetimes we have had or how long a human experience is of that lifetime. So the who decides, in essence, we're saying that we decide by deciding or by not deciding or by being attracted. The universe itself, the subtlety, the intricacy, the beauty of the universe, and whether you would like to call that God or another deity or forces that are, science plus humanity determines that. There's any number of what we could call that. Do you believe in an infinite power that determines how that comes together? Then you could say that there is a who associated with that determining. If you do not believe in a who, a specific being that determines these outcomes, then you may want to look at it simply as these incredible forces of nature that are so specific and perfect that we can barely fathom it, and that we are a part of and part of everything that is happening at the same time. So the who, the what, the why, and even the where of all of that happens by attraction itself. Pretty fascinating. I wish we could peek behind that beautiful curtain and know even more about some of these forces. I think that there are other teachers and other beings that have had real specific experiences of transitioning that could tell us more about that. And I hope to find out more about that as well. I'm looking at my questions here. Our friend, our Facebook friend who suggested this topic to begin with, she had asked me as well to talk about or comment on something from a past seminar that was the original Living, Dying, and Living Again. So maybe I'll do that one last, and unless I see any other questions from you as well. Her question had to do with something that we call the rate of return. And that is something, so in essence, the question about that would be, is there a specific time or distance by which one or all beings return to the earth? So in other words, do we have to wait 40 years until our next life? Or do some beings come back into a body immediately? Or is there something that determines the length of time as we know it now, that determines how long we are away? Or because it seems like some beings say, oh, I was last alive on the earth 400 years ago, or someone else may have been here 18 years ago. And we have experiences of, for instance, soldiers that died in World War I and reincarnated immediately so that they could be part of World War II. I mean, there's amazing stories. If you read some of the subject, it's unfathomable, some of the experiences that have been written about as well. So there is a theory that vaguely describes a rate of return, that we are given a certain amount of heartbeats, a certain amount of essential nature that which the heartbeats regulate. So the heartbeats not only regulate the body, but they are regulating our essence, our ability, spacing out our ability to, in some ways, accomplish all the different things that we want to in this life, either by a certain time or by a certain age, that there is a known equation, in a way, that has a number of heartbeats associated with our essential nature, and that is what we are given in our life. So more than just a purpose that we need to go out and accomplish or do or be or learn in this school, we are given essence, essential droplets, if you like, and that those droplets are then incorporated into our heartbeats, into how we feel our way through life. And that depending on whether we use all of that up or not, we have still earned that in some ways. And that also determines when we will come back. So, and that in fact, if we do come back, that all those, this is a terrible word, I'm just going to use the word brownie points, things that we have earned, essences that we have earned, that we bring that with us. And you will see that sometimes we meet individuals who appear to be living what looks like a charmed life or a very easy life compared to others. And it's not like we look at them and think that's unfair. We just look at them and say, how are they managing to do that? Well, we could say that is earned or carried forward. If we can say that we have to carry forward our karma of things that we didn't learn, or something that we may have caused discomfort or distress to ourselves or others and need to clear that, then we have to also be able to look at the other end of that spectrum and say that the things that we have earned or given or helped with or been of assistance to others, also we carry that with us as well too. So that kind of is figured into this equation, for lack of another word, that determines when we will come back, and that there are more blessed times to come back. There are more blessed places to be born than others. And so this rate of return, this way of understanding heartbeats and how we use our life in a measured way, in a way that considers life its own sanctuary, its own blessing, rather than looking about us and saying, that we're suffering our way through every day and can't wait for this to be over. So again, how we live determines how we will come back, and what and in what way. And this rate of return is determined by that as well. So mostly what I'm saying then is that nothing is ever lost, nothing is ever forgotten, not a thought, not a deed, not anything. Nothing is ever misplaced in the universe. But whether or not we have access to it immediately in the next moment or the next life, I can't say. But nothing is lost. And from a certain standpoint, it's all precious. For those of us that are listening, participating in this, the Buddhists have a way of describing this lifetime as a precious lifetime. It's a precious lifetime and as a life of leisure. And I want to explain that so that we might not think of ourselves as having much leisure time. We might think of us as being, chained to our jobs or our bills or our responsibilities and thinking that life is very difficult. But from that perspective, if we even have a moment to consider that to consider the thought of rebirth, a thought about reincarnation, that is a moment of leisure. If we can even consider some of those bigger questions that other people are so drawn to the suffering of life, that is a life of leisure. So in this case, leisure isn't necessarily how much time do you have to sit down and read a book, or how much time you have to watch television or visit with friends or go shopping or study, any of those things. A life of leisure is a life in which you are able to even consider any thought freely. You're able to consider a thought for more than a moment, or take a chance on living it, or make any decision on your own, or know that there will be a next meal, even if it's a small one. Anything like that is a life of leisure and a precious life. And because there are countless beings in the universe, these kinds of lives, even though they may seem quite difficult to us, are considered precious and lives of leisure. When I first heard that, I thought, I'm not sure. But as I look around the world, and as you do too, you may see that there are reasons to consider that that may be true. So I'm looking here at Thea's question as well. Do you think also that artificial insemination, do you think that is also an artificial insemination with semen donation? Oh, I see what you're talking about, because I was talking about before about conception. Yes. When it comes to that, all of the beings that have donated DNA are involved, have contributed to that life. So whether or not there is karma to be lived out or questions to be answered, it isn't necessarily that. It may simply be, for instance, dharma, a contribution, a loving contribution on the person who donated. Who donated through artificial insemination. That may be a gift and their dharma to assist someone who could not conceive, and they may not even be aware of each other. So it's not necessarily a karmic situation, but the contribution of mother, father, and the spirit being soul that is coming into the life, that is what is creating this lifetime. And yes, all the other factors that could be coming around that also contribute to the beginning of that lifetime. But whether the contributing DNA is incredibly affecting, if nothing else, the physical body of that being. And since that is for life, it is a connection for life, and something that maybe we do or don't think about as often these days, how interconnected everything is, and that if we do or don't know who the donor is or something, we're connected to these individuals, maybe in a small way or in a large way. So let me see what else is here. I had no idea we were going to be together this long, but it's been kind of fun. I hope you think so too. So let me read Dimitri's question. Does soul's previous incarnation want to be remembered in its next or future incarnation? Can there be a conscious connection or remembering to those selves who wanted to be remembered? It's kind of interesting. Usually, if something wants to be remembered, it usually comes from the part of us that is somehow related to or attached to our ego. And I don't mean that in that big, heavy way, oh, that's his ego talking. Not like that. Remembrance, there's the individualness that we are wants to be remembered. You know, let's say I would like to be remembered for being a good teacher or sharing this moment with you. This is a great moment. It brought us all together. I would like to be remembered for that. What is the part of me that wants to do that? In some way, the part of me that considers myself Pepper, the individual, Pepper, the teacher, your friend, whatever it is, that part of me wants to be remembered. The soul, however, is so not generic, but so expansive that it's only in the moment and only connecting through the present moment. The soul connects through the present moment, that instant recognition that we have. Oh, I know you. Oh, I feel you. And so if remembrance, if it is that, lasts but that one moment, because then the present moment takes over. And that union of being present together, that's what we're all missing so very much. That's why it's so difficult for us to make deep and lasting friendships, because we're either in the past someplace or we're in the future someplace. And when we're in the present where we want to have this friendship or this connection, it lasts so very little. So souls, in essence, do not need to be remembered. They would not come back. Steve Jobs more than likely would not come back and say, hey, I was the founder of Apple. That iPhone, that was me. So but the individual nature, or let's say that the same Steve Jobs essential nature, essential soul is born again and is an innovator again, that soul would then be able to draw on that nature, or perhaps the memories that made that possible, because then it contributes to that moment. It contributes to that being becoming an innovative creator, inventor, discoverer. Maybe it's the nature of that being. Maybe an athlete that broke a record for something and then comes back in the next life does not need to be remembered for that record that he broke in that one life, he or she, but maybe the essential nature of being an athlete who is capable of not accepting that you can't go beyond this certain place, that we can always grow and go beyond that and break records and create and do something new. So that essential nature would be carried into that life. So from that standpoint, I think that. And in answer to your question, can there be a conscious connection of selves who remember each other? Yeah, I think so. Don't you think we have met those individuals where we say, I know you, and we know that it has absolutely nothing to do with this lifetime, where we just know that we know these individuals, or that they know us, or that there has been some bond or experience, or that in some way life or the universe is bringing us together. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that too, whether or not we believe in reincarnation. You know, the one thing I didn't talk about as much in this chat was, what if we don't believe in it? What if you only believe that this is our one lifetime? We don't believe in rebirth or reincarnation or souls transmigrating, because there are many individuals that believe this is our one precious life and how we live it and what we do with it matters. We live, we were born by science, and that when we complete this lifetime, that's it. There's not a life after death. There's not a next life. That was the whole complete nature of this life. And I think that's a very fair and valid way to believe. We have to remember that who and what is believing is a personality, an individual, someone who has studied, someone who has maybe been confused or discovered that the things that we were told by other teachings are untrue. And since that is untrue, until I know better, I'm just going to trust that this is my one life, and I'm going to do the very best that I can with it, and that's good enough. And whether we call that atheism or agnosticism, or whether it doesn't even have to have a name, that's humanism, transhumanism. There's a lot of different ways to describe that, and that is a very valid point as well, because as much as we can talk about this subject, we don't know. You and I don't know, and we won't know until we know. And when we do know, we may even have a different experience of knowing. Your experience might be completely different than mine. Where you go, or what plane of consciousness you go to, might be a different world and a different understanding than where I go to. So we still might not say, okay, now that we're all meeting in the same place, we can all agree on this. We don't know. And so it's really not appropriate to judge people who do not believe in a God or a deity just because it's been centuries upon centuries that we have been taught to believe in that. And it's not appropriate to judge people who just say, I don't know, and I'm not sure that I want to know, and when it's time for me to know, that's when I'll know. So it's really important to acknowledge that all of us, and that these individuals can also live what we would call a very spiritual life, that they are not being deprived of anything because they can't remember their last life, and they're not that interested in if there is a next time or what it will be like. So that's the beauty of these subjects, is that we can explore them and take from them the bits and pieces that fit our understandings, or that make us feel comfortable and help us to sleep at night, and that we will continue to explore this. And we are individuals here, and then we will be something else when we are not this. And that's good enough. We'll either be something else, or we'll be nothing, or we'll be Gaia, or we'll be God, or we'll be the universe, or we'll be another planet. And I guess I'll just say I hope that I will be with all of you next time around, because at least I'll recognize someone familiar along the way and say, hey, remember when we studied reincarnation together? Look where we are now. Look what we're doing today. And isn't that fun? So anyway, it's been about an hour. I think it's been great. I'm really glad I waited till today, because I think I feel so much better and happy to explore and play with this subject. I love your questions. I love when you send me questions. I love when you post things on Facebook. I love I love when you suggest topics and things. So we'll have another newsletter soon, and just stay in touch with me. I love that we do that. We are a universal family. Like it or not, we are related to each other. There are ties that bind us together to this world and to this life, and I'm just happy with that. So enjoy the rest of your Saturday, or whatever day you happen to be listening to this later on, and I promise I'm around, and I'll be in touch soon. Okay, bye.